Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully, you had enjoyed a break over the President's Day, which gives you enough time to work on your midterms. So, thank you for those who submitted their works on time. And there are quite a few who haven't submitted yet. So we all know that your participation in the school and your assignments, homeworks, that counts. And I will still accept late works, but of course the grades will be reduced. But nevertheless, it's better than nothing. Also, I trust that school has been contacting you about your status, and we all in this together. We want to work all together. But because of the current situations of being online, and the only way is to, for you to submit your homeworks and papers on time. That way you will have credit, and that way you will have a good standing. So enough about this logistics. So this week we'll be talking about the church and science. And the next week we'll be talking about the church and state. And that leaves us the final week for the finals. So we almost there. So hang on there and stay safe. Hopefully the state of California will reopen, and everything will gradually and slowly and eventually go back to where we were before the pandemic hit us. So this week we'll be talking about church and its relationship with the development of the science. So there was always this a notion that church always kind of resisted the science, and they were always at odds with each other, and they were competing at times. The church was persecuting the scientists. We all know, heard about this Galileo affair, when this Galileo, the scientist, with the invention of this telescope, right? With the telescope, he come to conclusion that the universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. It's not geocentric, but it's heliocentric, meaning we are the one who's orbiting around the sun. So we know the story that the church didn't like it. They, immediately reacted, tried Galileo and stripped all his, scientific accomplishments. And we know that Galileo kind of surrendered, admitted his sin, and then he accepted the church position. So with that little incident that happened later, 16th century, 1633, even to this day, we have this widespread understanding that throughout its history, ever since its inception, that Christian church was always against facts and against reason, against the science, because the church is people of faith, and there are, they see everything through the eyes of God and through the eyes of their religious teachings, and also with the church being so powerful, the church doesn't want to lose its influence and power over the people, and but on the other hand, there was understanding that everything that's been scientific, so to speak, opposes the faith, the religion, and always looking down on religion because you can't prove, there's no experience, there's no facts, and that was the general understanding. I think even to this day, when a lot of people outside the faith see the church and the faith and the people of faith as inferior to the science, you can see this conversation going on even today in the 21st century in the American politics. You see there's two sides, and you can see how they're hitting each other, especially over this pandemic, the COVID-19 situation. So this is not a new problem. It's been there all this time. So we will touch about this. We're introductory course. We're not experts, but we will talk about the general situation, what happened. So we already talked about that the church grew under this Roman persecution, right? When the Rome was so powerful, its emperors were exalting themselves into the status of the gods and required the people to worship them as gods. But when there's a small group of people who call themselves followers of Jesus, of the way, and they first were called Christians in Antioch, so now they were growing, and their king and their loyalties to Jesus Christ, to this Nazarene carpenter who taught and preached in the Galilee, and then eventually, was convicted of heresy, of blasphemy, and being sentenced and crucified on the cross. But under this pressure, under this persecution, Christianity grew. So if you just simply Google the reasons why Roman Empire fall apart, historians and sociologists and people will have different opinions, and but one thing you will see, that there was a growing influence of Christianity from within. When the Rome was morally weak, when the emperors were promoting or competing for the status of gods, and also they had to compete, they had to stay in power in a harsh political environment. The teachings of love and obedience to the government and service to others were winning the people in the Roman Empire. Now outside the Roman Empire were getting weak politically, but inside the Christians were growing in numbers in spite of all this persecution. So what happened, we know, as we talked about with the Emperor Constantine, all people, all faith, the people of faith were free to exercise their religion. They were no longer, demand to worship the emperors or, their gods, whatever. But now, later, with 300 AD, 380, Christianity becomes a state religion. Now, church gains more and more power. Church head, the popes, they become more powerful. Right. They, when on the other hand, the political power were getting weaker and weaker. And I understand the first this pagan king of the Franks was converted into Christianity in somewhere around end of 5th century, when the Saint Benedict performs the baptism. And with this conversion of the pagan king into into Christianity by a mere monk, or the religious clergy, now it grows slowly but gradually grows more and more. And when the Pope Leo the Third crowns Charlemagne as a Roman emperor in 800, so from now on, the popes exert power over the emperors. So they kind of crown them, they bless them. So we see this transition of power slowly. So with that, we understand that the church was getting more in the power. They were having wider influence on society. But going back to the fall of the Roman Empire, one of the devastating consequences of this fall, we see the literacy. When you see the Roman Empire being attacked by these barbaric tribes from all sides, and their political power weakens, and the internal power struggle and divisions, and all these things happening, the chaos happens. There's no more peace, there's no more security, there's no more prosperity. And the first thing is, the most affected is the literacy. So after the fall of empire, like 5th and 6th century, right? What kept the ancient writings, ancient textbooks were kept in this isolated communities of monastics, monasteries, right? We heard Benedictines, Franciscans, and all these monasteries were the kind of center where they kept under rigorous discipline of study of ancient literature, and also they were teaching the craftsmanship, or and they were also keeping some form of the medicine or healing or hospitals. So with the stability, with the peace and with the stability now and urbanization, now the churches and no, the churches becomes the main institution place of education. So after the fall, during this chaotic few centuries, the education, all this, the jewel of the knowledge were kept in the monasteries, in these isolated desert communities where they were kept and revered and studied. Now with the modern the civilization, with the urbanization, now the church is becoming the center of education. So from this on, like early 1100s or 1200s, where the again the political stability of Europe kind of shaken, but still the groundwork is there. The church is there. They keep teaching, and they having this education and practicing their own medicine now with more prosperity and more peace with the starting 12th 13th centuries. We know this universities becoming the center of the science and the knowledge and the institutions. So during the medieval ages, so we heard about this institution of Oxford, of Paris, of Bologna in Italy, and all these places where all these ancient books and ancient scriptures and literatures were kept and studied. Now with Aquinas, right, the guy who kind of worked on the Plato and ancient writers, Aristotle. Now he kind of writes more, and his writings were becomes the basic textbooks for this huge European universities, which lays the groundwork for the advancement of physical sciences and the Renaissance and onwards. But the Middle Age, during the Middle Ages, the churches were the center of the communities, not only for the religious affairs, for religious worship, but also it was the main place for education. And then later it grew to be universities. So with this urbanization and education, we can conclude that the church wasn't the enemy of the advancement, wasn't the enemy of civilization, wasn't the enemy of education, but in fact it was behind all these schools and universities. It was behind all these new discoveries. The Galileo, where did he get all this knowledge, all this, brilliant ideas of telescope and, knowledge of astronomy? It started all way early, in ancient antiquity, like pre-history, like with Plato, with Aristotle, and then with with later guys, with the guys early church, um, you know, fathers and desert communities that kept this ancient writings and kept studying, and with Aquinas and all the other brilliant guys now, they're studying this with more brilliance, which lays the foundation of the modern science, modern knowledge. So during these times, of course, the church was behind the, every area of scientific study or advancement. Again, I just briefly mentioned about in the field of astronomy, when these ancient guys, even these brilliant people like Plato and Aristotle, they were all thinking that the Earth was the center of the universe, and everything was, revolving around us. But then it later we find out that no, it was much bigger, and it was much more than just our own little galaxy, but it's much more. Then also during the in the field of medicine, these isolated monastic communities in the desert or elsewhere, they were, they kept these medical practices. They carried out throughout this fall of empire, and they kept this throughout this, political instability in 10th and 11th centuries. Now they had their own hospitals, so to speak, they kept them, in which later, with more prosperity and urbanization, now it developed into more formal hospitals. So in doing so, the church was also behind this field of medicine. And the craftsmanship also were kept in the communities, and also these hospitals where they were first surgeries were for practiced or experimented, and there's in a conclusion, is what I can say, what this course can say, is that the church was always supporting the institutions of education, which in turn opened up the modern sciences. So even though the church was run by these corrupt human beings who were power hungry and who were also wanted to exert their influence over the masses of people, of course there was always tension or conflict between the new ideas and the traditional long-standing positions. There was always tension, but one thing I can tell, and my position is, the church was always behind every advancements in human civilization, including in the fields of science, in every field. the period we are looking for is from early patristic era of the church until the early Renaissance. But after this period of time, the church also gave birth to brilliant scientists, and also the secular society, also produced brilliant minds that, rejected the idea of God. So from that onwards, there was always been, so to speak, competition. There were always, there were always forces that were against faith, but faith and the church, there was always against the humanity, against the advancement and prosperity and peace of the human society. So the church never, against the science per se. Of course, there were incidences like the Galilean affair, and some, during the Middle Ages, when they persecuted, exerted their power over, over, so to speak, individual case by case cases. But in general, the church was always supporting and funding the schools, the field of research, medicine, education, universities, which give birth to brilliant scientists in the Reformation and Enlightenment era. So this is the basic position we are coming from, that even though there's a hot, debate, citing always this Galilean affair, which happened 1633, as if, it was always been that way throughout the first millennia. But the church history itself and my position today is that no, the church is where the knowledge was kept. The church, when the society was in turmoil, when the Roman Empire was falling apart, there were always, raging wars, and civilizations were fighting for their survival. The church, the communities, the isolated communities, desert communities, monastic communities, they the ones who were, who were guardians of the knowledge, who kept all these precious jewels, minds, and scripts and books from ancient world. They were studied, they were restudied, and now they're in the churches and the parishes throughout Europe, teaching from the elementary level, and then it eventually becomes the universities of Oxford, of Paris, of Bologna, and where the modern science came out to be. So the position is that the church always supported the knowledge, the science, in general, except few, isolated instances like the Galileo affair. But other than that, the position of this course is that faith and reason is always can work together and complement and improve or develop, not compete, but even if it's at odds against each other, it can also benefit each other by sharpening each other. But so far, the period of time we are looking from the birth of church, the early fathers, and the early Renaissance. In this period, there's not much, big discoveries, but still, this is the period where the church was the guardian of the knowledge, where the ancient treasury of the knowledge were kept, studied, and laid the foundation of the modern science. So only after the Enlightenment era, when people haven't started projecting backwards, that the idea the church was against the science, the church was persecuting scientists. Look, for example, Galileo. That happened later, much later. But up until this point, the church was behind these huge educational institutions which laid the groundworks for the modern science. Okay, that concludes my brief lecture of the Church and Science. I expect to have the summary of the lecture, your opinion, one paragraph, short. You could take another position, different position, that if you say the church was against the science, then you have to, bring support your idea and support your argument. And that's all for today, and we will see you next week. Hopefully everyone will submit their work on time so that you can get the full credit for the attendance.